Sarah was an ambitious young professional working at a renowned technology company. She stood out for her dedication to her work and was committed to proving her worth. That night, her boss had called her in for an urgent task that required her to stay at the office late. It was an unusual night, gloomy and rainy, with drops of rain hitting the windows of the office building steadily. Sarah had started her extra workday with determination, focusing on completing the task and leaving a lasting impression on her superiors. The office, normally bustling during the day, was now enveloped in an oppressive silence. All her colleagues had left, and Sarah found herself alone in her office, lit only by the dim light from her desk lamp. The only sound that broke the silence was the steady rhythm of the rain outside. Focused on her computer, Sarah immersed herself in work, typing reports and reviewing documents. However, as the hours progressed, the monotony of the task and the silent environment began to take its toll on her. Fatigue accumulated, and she felt her eyes getting heavy. It was then that the first strange sounds broke the silence. Sarah raised her head and frowned, trying to identify the source of the noises. At first they sounded like distant whispers, barely audible, as if voices were being muffled. She adjusted her headphones, thinking that perhaps the noises were coming from a colleague who was still in the building. However, when he listened carefully, he realized that the sounds did not resemble normal conversations. They were more like unintelligible murmurs, as if several voices were whispering incomprehensible words at the same time. Sarah was distraught as she was sure she was alone in the office. With a growing sense of unease, she turned off her headphones and remained silent, trying to discern where the noises were coming from. The whispers continued, becoming more audible and disturbing. Now, they seemed to be closer, as if they were moving towards him. Sarah began to feel an ominous presence, as if something was watching her in the dark. Trying to remain calm, she left her room and walked down the empty hallway. The office lights were partially off due to the late hour, and the combination of shadows and the echoes of whispers made her feel like she was in a nightmare. As it progressed, the strange sounds intensified. Now, she heard soft footsteps echoing down the hallway, as if someone was walking stealthily. His heart started to beat faster, and a feeling of apprehension set in. Sarah didn't know what to expect and was determined to find out the source of the mysterious noises. As he followed the sounds, a question echoed in his mind. Was she really alone on that dark night, or was there something else, something lurking in the shadows of the empty office? Sarah walked down the dark hallway, each step echoing on the cold tiles of the floor. The intermittent, dim lighting increased the feeling of helplessness, and the disturbing whispers continued to accompany her. She felt like she was being watched, as if invisible eyes were following her every move. The soft footsteps that echoed in the hallways seemed to defy logic. Sarah knew she was alone in the building, and the presence of another person at that time of night was highly unlikely. Even so, the feeling of something approaching her was undeniable. She forced herself to take a deep breath and maintain her courage as she walked down the dark hallway. The unintelligible murmurs of whispers turned into a clearer, audible whisper, as if the voices were getting closer. Sarah reached a crossroads in the hallway and hesitated for a moment, trying to determine the direction of the noises. It was then that a quick, dark shadow moved in front of him. Her eyes widened, and she gave a muffled cry of surprise. The shadow moved quickly, gliding down the corridor towards him. Sarah instinctively backed away, her heart beating wildly. She tried to focus her eyes on the dark figure, trying to discern some detail, but it was as if she were staring into pure darkness. As the shadow approached, the feeling of fear intensified. Sarah felt as if she were being drawn into a surreal nightmare, where reality and terror were inextricably intertwined. She needed to react. She needed to find a logical explanation for what was happening. With an effort to remain calm, Sarah turned and began walking in the opposite direction, away from the shadowy figure chasing her. His steps were hurried but silent as he walked down the corridor, hoping to find a way out or some plausible explanation. However, the further away she got, the more the feeling that something was wrong haunted her. Whispers continued to fill the air, and she could feel invisible eyes watching her. She wondered if she was going crazy, if these inexplicable events were the result of her overworked imagination. Sarah finally arrived at a door that led to a break area where employees often gathered during the day. She hoped to find evidence that someone else was in the building or a logical explanation for the noises and mysterious shadow. Upon pushing the door open, the break room was empty and dark, but what disturbed her most was the feeling that something had been there. The chairs were messy, as if someone had got up hastily, and a cup of coffee was spilled on the floor, with the liquid still running. Sarah was increasingly convinced that something strange was happening, something that couldn't be explained rationally. She felt a chill run down her spine when she realized she wasn't alone in that building. The unsettling presence that haunted her was becoming more and more real, and she had no idea what was coming. Sarah was determined to discover the origin of the inexplicable events that took place that dark night in the office. Even though she was terrified, she knew she needed to find answers before fear completely overcame her. She left the break room and continued her exploration, now more alert than ever. The hallways seemed longer and darker, and the lighting still failed, casting unsettling shadows on the walls. The whispers continued to accompany her, increasing the feeling that something sinister was happening. Sarah began scouring the company's files and records, looking for information about previous incidents or stories of supernatural happenings related to the building. She wasn't sure what she was looking for, but she had a feeling that the key to unlocking the mystery was hidden somewhere in those documents. While leafing through the records, she noticed that there were mentions of strange events that had occurred in the past, such as lights flashing inexplicably and objects moving on their own. However, these incidents had been attributed to electrical problems or simply ignored. In her search for answers, Sarah found a dusty folder that contained old newspaper clippings. Among them was an article that made her skin crawl. The article reported on a devastating fire that had occurred in the building decades ago, resulting in several deaths and significant destruction. One of the victims of the fire was a woman named Emily, who had been found dead under mysterious circumstances. According to the article, Emily had last been seen the night of the fire, and witnesses claimed to have heard her curse those who betrayed her before disappearing into the flames. Sarah felt a shiver run down her spine when she read about Emily's story. Could it be that the shadowy figure chasing her was somehow related to the woman who had died in the fire? The coincidences were too disturbing to ignore. Determined to discover the truth, Sarah decided to seek help from a local medium who was known for dealing with the supernatural. She felt it was her only hope of understanding what was happening that terrifying night. After making contact with the medium, Sarah explained the situation and arranged a meeting for the same evening. She had no more time to waste and was willing to face anything to unravel the mystery that haunted her. When night had completely fallen, Sarah met with the medium in a quiet location away from the office. He was an old man with wise eyes that seemed to penetrate his soul. In a calm voice, he explained that he had handled many supernatural cases throughout his career and was willing to help. Together, they began to perform a ritual to try to communicate with the entity that was chasing her. The candles flickered as the medium recited ancient and mysterious words. Sarah felt a tension in the air, as if something was about to reveal itself. It was then that the room suddenly became colder and the atmosphere became dense. An invisible presence hovered around them, and a whispering voice began to fill the silence like an ominous wind. The entity was manifesting, and Sarah was about to face the terrifying truth that lurked in the shadows. The room was enveloped in an icy cold atmosphere, and the whispering voice of the invisible entity continued to echo in the air. Sarah and the medium were completely immersed in the ritual, determined to uncover the truth behind the terrifying events that had occurred in the office. The invisible presence seemed to grow in intensity, as if it was approaching them. Sarah felt shivers run down her spine and a feeling of oppression in her chest. She longed for answers, but also feared what she might discover. The medium, with a serious expression, began to ask the entity questions. He asked who she was and why she was disturbing the office. The whispering voice responded in an anguished whisper, revealing that it was the soul of Emily, the woman who had died in the fire decades ago. Emily explained that she had been unfairly blamed for the fire and that her death had been the result of a conspiracy to cover up the truth. She had sworn revenge before she died, and now, like a supernatural entity, she was fulfilling her promise. The revelation left Sarah stunned. She couldn't believe she was dealing with the soul of someone who had been betrayed and killed in such terrible circumstances. Emily claimed that those responsible for the fire were powerful figures in the company, people who had never faced the consequences of their actions. Sarah was determined to help Emily find justice and peace, but she didn't know how to do it. She asked the medium if there was any way to free the troubled soul and allow her to find eternal rest. The medium explained that performing an exorcism ritual was the only way to release Emily's soul and end the persecution that was haunting the office. Sarah was willing to move forward, not only for her own safety, but also to help Emily find the peace she so desperately wanted. The exorcism ritual began with candles lit and incense burning. The medium recited ancient and mysterious words, while Sarah kept her mind focused on the intention of freeing Emily. The atmosphere became even more charged, and the room seemed to vibrate with a supernatural energy. As the ritual unfolded, Sarah felt a strong presence around her, as if an invisible force was being expelled from the place. She heard Emily's whispers grow fainter, until they finally ceased altogether. With one last effort, the medium concluded the ritual and extinguished the candles. The room returned to its normal temperature, and the dense atmosphere dissipated. Sarah looked around, noticing that the unsettling presence was gone. She was exhausted, but also relieved. She had faced the supernatural and helped Emily's soul find eternal rest. Now, the office was at peace, and the terrifying events that had haunted that dark night had come to an end. Sarah would never forget the supernatural experience she had experienced there. She had faced the unknown and discovered the truth behind a tragic past. The night of terror had left deep scars, but it had also transformed her into someone more courageous and determined. As she left the scene, Sarah knew that Emily's story would not be forgotten. She promised to keep alive the memory of the woman who had been the victim of a terrible injustice, and assured that her story would be told so that the truth would prevail even after her death.